Hello. Maybe we can get started. Sorry about the a little bit of confusion on time, but we'll pick it up from here. Thanks a lot for joining us for this session. We'd like to kind of springboard off of what Loazi and also Stavros were talking about in terms of the investment, who's prepared to invest, where the revenues coming from to make these significant strategic investments in healthcare. And I wanted to introduce our panelists. We have a pretty esteemed, not even pretty, we've got a wonderful panel of fantastic entrepreneurs and also significant investors across. To my left, I have Viv Jain. She runs the DFC in Johannesburg, focused on low middle income countries around the world. And as you know, DFC is quite a significant U.S. government organization, international government organization. And I'll just lead in by saying that they have significant investable capital for major projects, and they've been involved quite significantly with companies like Aspen and others, and I won't steal the thunder. We also have Dr. Ntuku Bingu, who is the founder of the Alchemy Health Technologies. He's quite involved in South African healthcare, National Planning Commission, and he was also a panelist for the health market inquiry around the Competitions Commission and how well the healthcare system was being run or not being run. So he's a fantastic and very credible jurist. Then we have Dr. Frank Aswani. Frank is the CEO of the Africa Venture Philanthropy Alliance. Not only being Kenyan and understanding the African continent quite well, he's responsible for catalyzing communities in response to South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, where over 350 organizations and individuals are engaged in contributing to various aspects of healthcare-related projects. And he can talk a little bit more about how that works. And then finally, we have Dr. Wilmot Allen. Let's see if I get this working here. Dr. Allen is in charge and founder of the African Healthcare and Biotech Alliance. Wilmot is the founder of this alliance and really focuses on entrepreneurial development, investment, and research between and amongst the diaspora and with their African counterparts, not only here, but also in the United States. He's a genomics entrepreneur, and he's quite excited about developing ways in which we can expand and enhance a lot of the technologies across Africa. So without further ado, just a little bit about myself. I'm Christopher Whitfield. I currently work for Gilead Sciences. I have been fortunate to be in South Africa for about 21 years now. No, I haven't lost my accent. But it's been fantastic. I started off with Eli Lilly, and then I had my own company with Batswati, and just when we thought we were going to go home and take care of my parents, I was asked by Gilead to stick around. And they had a very interesting challenge. They said, we'd like to expand our business in Africa, but we have fairly expensive medications. How do we make this work? And so part of what we've been trying to do is come up with creative ways to make products more accessible. I think Stavros mentioned earlier about some of the projects that Aspen and Gilead had executed in the early 2000s. Most recently, Gilead had the opportunity to participate in the global health response to the COVID-19 crisis with remdesivir. And we actually worked using our voluntary license platform, something we've been doing since 2006, to make remdesivir more readily available in the emerging world. We partner with 9 different manufacturers, including one in Egypt, one in Pakistan, and the balance were in India. And I've only been with the company about a little bit over just about 2 years. And one question I had was, why didn't we use a voluntary license for remdesivir for a South African company? So who's the first person to give me a call and welcome me to Gilead? Stavros. So we're looking at opportunities to do more of our technologies in South Africa, but of course, everything Stavros and Loazi talked about before stands. How do we make that business sustainable? So without further ado, I wanted to ask each one of the panelists to kind of go through, and I think Vib, if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit more about your initiatives with the DFC.
Yes. Oh, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. As mentioned, I'm Vib Jain. I'm with the US DFC. That stands for the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation. We are the U.S. government's DFI, or Development Finance Institution. So we're similar to the IFC, except we're entirely owned by the U.S. government. So we essentially invest in emerging markets, in projects that are commercially sustainable and deliver development impact. In South Africa, just to give you all an understanding of our footprint, we've invested nearly $1.2 billion over the past decade. We have over $9 billion invested across sub-Saharan Africa. Like most development finance institutions, we offer a variety of financing products. We offer long-term debt financing and loan guarantees. We offer equity, both direct and intermediated through funds. We offer technical assistance, and we offer political risk insurance. In the healthcare space, which I think we've several of you have just heard about from Aspen and from one of the president's advisors, we've actually been making a concerted effort to do a lot more. Early in 2020, in fact, prior to the pandemic, we launched a health and prosperity initiative, recognizing that DFC was underweighted in our health sector investing, and that there was a broad need for the types of things we heard the prior panelists speak about, that is investment across the manufacturing supply chain, in diagnostics, and in healthcare services and access for African populations. Since early 2020, we've actually made $2 billion in commitments across developing markets in approximately 24 projects. Significantly, we provided our first ever local currency loan to Aspen for the construction of a new sterile manufacturing facility that allows them to produce a variety of products, including the J&J COVID-19 vaccine. We provided a $1 billion direct loan to Gavi for their COVAX initiative to help them get started on the Advanced Market Commitment Program. That was our largest ever healthcare investment. We've also provided Gavi with political risk insurance. We have invested in smaller projects across the continent, including in Africa Healthcare Networks. And sorry, I'm not really going through the slides because I know that we're short on time, so I'm just talking you through them, and I'm happy to share a PDF of them afterwards with the conference organizers. But an example of some of our smaller investments, just to make it clear that we're not just focused on COVID-19 vaccine, but across the value chain, is we made a $5 million direct loan to Africa Healthcare Networks. They are an East Africa-based dialysis center operator providing high-quality, affordable services to the population. We made a $1 million equity investment in Kasha, which is a women-led health and hygiene e-commerce provider. And so really, I'm providing you with all these examples to essentially say we're open for business. We would like to do more. In South Africa in particular, we know the WHO has selected South Africa to be the site of its first ever mRNA hub, which we're very excited about. We're in fact partnering with BioVac and providing them with technical assistance, and potentially there will be opportunities for longer term partnership on, in addition to that. But I say this all because I think there's a lot of really stellar opportunities across the continent to think about healthcare, how we deliver health services in this context, how we make Africa more resilient from a health security perspective. So not just focusing on the end product, which is the vaccines, but think about supply chains, think about all those products that are needed as part of the value chain. So producing medical grade glass, producing biobags, producing top quality professionals that will, run companies that make these products. So we're very passionate about that. I'm not a healthcare expert like many of you in the room, but I've learned a lot about it during the course of my work with DFC. So I really look forward to engaging with many of you virtually or in person. And I'm based in Johannesburg. Thanks. That was a long intro.
No, that's great. That's perfect. Thank you so much. Dr. Bingu, would you like to let us know a little bit more about your organization. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. I'm Tutu Opengu, the founder and CEO of Alchemy Health Technologies. I also serve as a non-executive director on Afrigen, one of the mRNA hub companies based in Cape Town. I'm also on the Amazon Web Services Innovators Board for the local market that is in South Africa. Alchemy Health Technologies is a health data management company. We will contribute towards the reduction of costs of quality healthcare. We'll do this through employing digital tools that will improve efficiencies in health data management and as well payment systems. To date, what have we done? We've started through establishing a database of health practitioners, pharmacists, and one of the issues that we are definitely implementing is to try and encourage more active participation in clinical trials by practitioners in general. So I could say that the title of my talk, there is reference to blockchain, and that's precisely because blockchain, we looked at what the pain points are for the industry, and we not pursuing blockchain for the sake of it, but we understand very clearly how it could plug the gaps that exist in the market. And that's really based on, largely on the strong capabilities that have to do with the decentralization of data. We're looking at immutability of data, meaning that once it's validated, it can't really be changed or lost. We talk about transparency of data and, of course, the security thereof. Now, with those key attributes, it lends itself nicely to the sort of use cases that can be grouped in about 4 big categories. One being, of course, the management of data, the other clinical data, the other group being claims and payments thereof, and obviously what is more appropriate for this convention is in the pharmaceutical industry, where the supply chain side of it, tracking, cold chain storage, and of course significantly the whole point of dealing with counterfeit medicine. And the 4th category is that around clinical trials, and I do hope that you'll take the opportunity to come and see the demo on the blockchain-based clinical trials software, which we'll demonstrate on Thursday. Now, I will actually stop here, Chris, because we can still talk about the financing issues that we have to deal with. I'm the only one here who's not giving you money, but who will be asking for it, so you all have to follow me. I'll take advantage that I'm with them here on the team.
That's good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doc. Thank you so much. Frank Eswani, please let us know a little bit more about your project, please.
Thank you, Chris. Hi, everyone. So my name is Frank Eswani. I'm CEO of AVPA. We are a Pan-African network of social investors. The problem we're trying to solve is the SDG financing gap. How do we crowd in enough capital to address Africa's 2030 goals? Pre-COVID, we were on course to meet only 2 of the 17 SDGs, and healthcare was not one of them. Our SDG financing gap right now is between $500 billion to $1.2 trillion annually, between now and 2030. A lot of that traditionally has been funded through aid and government funding. We know that aid is reducing to Africa. We know what happened with USAID towards the end of Trump's years. We know the UK government cut aid to Africa. And the most affected countries are Southern African countries. Fundamentally, it's a crisis of success. So the more middle income you become, the less deserving you become of aid. So damned if you do, damned if you don't. 30% loss in aid over a 5-year period from a study we did. And if you think about that $1.2 trillion we need annually, Africa gets about $50 billion of aid, and our government tax collections, give or take, are about $600 billion. So where are we going to get money to close that gap? And that leaves us very few options but turning to the private sector, where there's over $300 trillion sitting in capital markets, for example. But we know that the private sector doesn't totally understand the space. It finds social investments very risky. They're looking for risk-return ratios that they must meet their own goals, and that creates a different angle to approach. But we're at a point where profit and purpose are not mutually exclusive. We can create opportunities where capital can find returns that it needs while delivering social impact at the same time. So a lot of what I do is to try and bridge the traditional gap between philanthropy and private capital. I spend a lot of my time convincing the private sector that you can do good as you do well, and the traditional philanthropist or development sector that space doesn't only consume grants. There's a lot of solutions in the private sector, in the social development space, that have commercial opportunity, which, if fully exploited, those market-based solutions can give more sustainable impact than any grant can support. So that's basically what we look at. We should also be very blessed as a group of people sitting in this room now. We were blessed with the crisis. It will be really sad if we come out of this crisis not thinking better, not thinking differently. Our kids will curse us for not changing how the world was shaped and how Africa is going to do things differently. This is the biggest blessing we could get. So we've got to be asking ourselves, what are we going to do differently from here? With the size of healthcare needs on this continent, have you ever asked yourself, why don't we have a unicorn? Why don't we have a $1 billion healthcare company that's locally driven? There's a lot of them in tech. There are almost 11 now. Why haven't we done that? And those are some of the things we need to think about, is how do we drive healthcare opportunities? Africa, by the way, I know especially when aid reduces, the biggest sectors that are hit are the public good sectors, healthcare and education. But there's a UNECA report that says there's $66 billion of investment opportunities on Africa in healthcare alone. Where are the unicorns? Who's putting in money to exploit those opportunities and to serve Africans? Because we know governments cannot meet all our needs, healthcare needs on this continent. So that's what keeps me awake, is how do we help crowd private capital into this space to help address some of those issues. So I work with investors. I lead an investor-only community. But when I say an investor-only community, my investors are deploying grants, debt, or equity into the impact space. So my membership ranges from foundations, family offices, right across to aid agencies, DFIs, governments, and corporates. And I support investors through a couple of different ways. We connect them to each other because part of the problem is just finding who you could partner with, who you could co-invest with. So we have a deal share platform as well that we showcase investable pipeline on the continent. And we list there some of the impact deals that we find across the continent. Secondly, we run a lot of capacity building programs. We're lining up to start one in September. It's a Africa Healthcare Funders Forum. So any of you who are Africa Healthcare Funders who want to coordinate and connect with other African healthcare funders looking to play in this space, please get in touch with us. The program will be preceded by a 4-month impact investing training program. So we can really try and see how we can continue driving this merger of profit and purpose. And then there'll be a lifelong community of practice thereafter. And then we're also doing something really interesting. We're going to test out some catalytic pooled funds. I'm not sure if any of you know about catalytic funding, but if you don't, please check out a consortium called the C3 Consortium, the Catalytic Capital Consortium out of the US. It's 4 foundations. It's 3 actually. It's DFC was part of that, MacArthur, Rockefeller, and Omidyar. And MacArthur have given us a grant to run Africa's first catalytic investment training for grant makers, including governments, because I think the biggest holders of philanthropy capital in Africa are governments. And how do we ask ourselves, for every dollar we put into healthcare, shouldn't just give us $1 of value? Can it give us $10, $20, $30 of value by thinking catalytically? That's why we've got to think differently. And on back of that also, we're testing 3 catalytic pool funds, one for healthcare, which it is really about trying to support early stage investments and give risk capital to high portfolio companies that have opportunities for scale. And then the last thing that I'll talk about right now is we've got a really interesting project we'll be doing. We're doing research starting in about 2 weeks' time to map out just the state of innovative financing in South Africa. What is the lay of the land? Where are the gaps? Who's doing what? And healthcare, so we're sector agnostic, but healthcare is one of the sectors we're going to look at. The goal for that research is to come out with identifying the gaps and what interventions can we decide and partner with whom to address those gaps. And then I'll talk about 1 or 2 other things later.
Thanks a lot, Frank. I think we're going to have a lot of conversations and questions about some of your projects. Certainly the Catalytic Fund sounds very, very exciting. And I always think that the time for Africa to continue to receive donations and handouts is over. We need to actually turn this into a commercial opportunity to grow. So I'm 100% with you. Dr. Allen, can you talk a little bit about where else can the money come from?
Good afternoon. Let me just give a little more background on myself, because I'm going to share a little bit about information and opportunities that are at the intersection of healthcare, finance, and sociology. And so I just want to preface to say, so I come to this event wearing a couple of hats. Private equity healthcare investor with the fund here in South Africa, a venture partner with RH Managers. Recently, this year, began a stint with the Health Finance Coalition, which is partnering with the Transform Africa Health Fund as their lead advisor for deal construction projects. In 2019, I worked directly with Dr. John Ngingetsong, his managing director for the Africa CDC and the rollout of its Africa Public Health Foundation. Prior to that, in my earlier days, when I was considering a career in healthcare, was a clinical researcher at Procter & Gamble, my hometown of Cincinnati, and also was a managing consultant to Allergan Pharmaceuticals, which many women probably know is the manufacturer of Botox and other things. And so I say that just because I have an appreciation. Also, I should say, I worked at private equity, emerging markets with the IFC, and led the East Africa Trade and Investment Hub transaction team with the U.S. firm called Cross Boundary. And so I come to this with an appreciation of a lot of the activity and great work across different sectors that has been done. But I said I was going to talk a little bit about sociology and the enterprise that I lead, Africa Healthcare and Biotech Alliance. You can find more information about it at allafricahealth.com. Is solving a problem based upon the merits that we see other countries outside of Africa mastered to promote their economic transformation. Israel, China, India, and that's the African diaspora globally. That is, yes, indeed, Nigerians in America, Tanzanians in the UK, Cameroonians in France, and Black Americans, the historical diaspora like Carissa and myself. What we are doing is pioneering a new way to bring in new economic actors into the continent beyond remittances and structured vehicles. One model is a diaspora angel investor fund. It's also a venture studio model where we bring in companies and pair them up with their African business counterparts for joint venture partnerships that can grow and scale. Another way in which we do this venture model is by bringing in companies that strategically are focusing on a particular problem in an industry. For example, genomics in 2020, I founded a genomics company, which I'm retooling my efforts there in that sector. But when it comes to healthcare, the diaspora, I think, should be low-hanging fruit for engagement, because we're talking a lot about DNA and maladies that oftentimes can be traced to commonalities around genetic profiling. So that's one angle of it. The other angle is the fact that if you were to bring the African diaspora population just in the United States into the continent, you would have the seventh or eighth largest country, richest in terms of GDP per capita, and in purchasing power that is largely untapped beyond remittances. And those remittances, as we all know, largely come from first, second, third generation African immigrant families and individuals in the U.S. Black Americans are not even on the radar, notwithstanding a lot of the great work from churches and high net worth individuals that we see across the continent. So I want to submit to you all today that as you think about growing your enterprises, attracting capital for your research, looking for investors, and those of you, like my colleague here, my colleague here is looking at DNA and genomics and genetic profiling, to consider this opportunity and this network that's largely untapped. And it's one now that, thankfully for the Biden administration, is receiving more attention and more focus. Frank and I have talked about this in his work, and he's focused on that as well, because it's a great, great opportunity. Not only is it good because of the redemptive narrative of the diaspora working with their counterparts here, but it's also great business, and it's untapped business for all the things that I have laid out. The least of which is this last one, and I'll say this, it's advocacy. So when we talk about pharmaceutical development in Africa, the diaspora around the world would be an advocate for purchasing, an advocate, for example, in the US, for policies to be aligned with development and manufacturing on the continent, if those advocates and those institutions were better mobilized and better structured. But that's where the partnership with the continent comes in, with the AU, with institutions like Frank's, with the development finance institutions of the U.S., as Samantha Power and USAID and others are stressing now, that the diversity quotient is really, really important. And we've seen how, and this is the last thing I'll say, the focus on women has made and is making a difference. A lot more to do, but the gender lens has become not only an influencer in the way investors and trade partners and policymakers view economic development in Africa, but even in its own asset class now. How much more could the benefits, economic impact, and benefits of diaspora alignment with the continent pay huge dividends?
Thanks so much. Let me just pick up on what you just said, because I think there's a nexus between you and Dr. Bingu. Many of you may know that certain types of cancer affect certain race groups more often than others. I'll pick one. Triple negative breast cancer is a significant breast cancer. It significantly affects women of color. Interestingly enough, as the research is being done across the United States, there is a low amount of contribution in terms of research from women of color. But genetically speaking, we might be a little bit closer, African Americans and Africans. Where's the opportunity there to maybe expand the research platforms in Africa to really try and bridge the gap and expose the opportunities for some of the technologies? You and that. Yeah.
Sure, I'll start and turn over. I think we're seeing it that Africa CDC has prioritized such initiatives. I think as we think about the outreach now to the continent among historical black colleges and universities, the HBCUs, we see it. We are talking with one of them now and working with them soon to bring training in genomics and to support the development of an oncology center in East Africa. And so I think, Chris, they're happening, it's all happening in sort of a fragmented basis. And I think there's a lot more to do. The key is the financial capital that's going to support that. And then there has to be partnership with some of the global ecosystem players, whether they're pharmaceutical companies, biotech companies that actually have their diversity and equity and inclusion initiatives in the U.S. now expanding that to the continent. There's a disconnect. Many of those diversity and equity and inclusion initiatives have not traveled from North America to the continent in ways that are structured, in ways that are compelling, in ways where and approaches that have been financed, that are tracked, and where there's just an intentionality. Diversity, as we all know, is about intentionality, and so I think it is happening. I think a lot more can be done.
Dr. Binker?
No, thank you very much. I will just briefly give a little bit of background and why I appreciate in setting up the panel you brought me here. Other than the fact that Alchemy is not a financier, certainly on the entrepreneurial stage, but the point is our product or service. It's also different. We're not in the physical product in the sense of medicine or medical devices, but we are in data. And that becomes a hard sell when you are sort of piloting new ways of processing data. And so this, I make the point. The other time I had a discussion with the Development Bank of South Africa that says we finance healthcare infrastructure. And I say, but have you considered that tech now is part of healthcare infrastructure? Most admissions are happening outside of hospital because it's more, it's easier to now monitor remotely. And in making a direct point here, similarly, one thing everyone will understand very clearly, but will probably be surprised. South Africa is fairly well, catered for in terms of data, except the data that's not there. And that's the clinical notes, because the only stakeholders that can effectively capture this are practitioners, and all of those notes are sitting in hard copy in patient files. When we look at the claims payment systems, all of that is electronic, but it's not really clinical information, it's financial information. So there is a gap that just because people who interact with patients aren't digitized, that is missing in the entire system. This is where, as Alchemy, we keep knocking, that in terms of research, you need digitized data to inform what you are researching while you are busy executing the research, and your outputs also need to be captured properly. So when my colleagues on the table look at financing healthcare, we need to think broadly. Because while all of the solutions around genomics are excellent and long overdue, it's about making sure that the mechanism of capturing, of interpreting all of that data does ultimately support the outcome that is a product in the way that we understand it. So look, that's the point we always want to make, and we excited just asking financiers to understand the definition of healthcare and healthcare infrastructure and services has changed. It used to be simple. You used to say you either have on the funding side or delivery side, which is more the practitioner side, the device side of things. It's no longer. There's a reason why companies like the Siemenses, the Philips, who were very much strong in the hospital space, are actually migrating out of hospital. You now have the Apples, the Microsofts, who are also becoming healthcare companies. So it's quite fluid. And the biggest mistake is not to fund, to provide the patient capital needed to basically show how technologies like blockchain are enhancing the entire infrastructure that will ultimately lead to medicines.
Fantastic. Let's stick with that. Let's think about what trends in healthcare financing in Africa are everybody's most excited about. Let's think about innovations in service delivery, like you guys mentioned before, and also focus on health security. And I'll just open it up. I don't know, Jane, if you want.
Okay, I can start. So I think, one of the things we've noticed as we're emerging, hopefully, from this pandemic is, of course, there's a big opportunity to actually think about how we make the entire supply chain more resilient and more stable and secure in the African continent. So we've been supporting vaccine manufacturing. I mentioned our financing to Aspen, to BioVac. We're also supporting Institut Pasteur de Dakar in Senegal. But I think beyond that, there's a big opportunity now to seize upon some of the momentum we've seen with the mRNA hub that the doctor to my left just mentioned, and also think about what else in the supply chain are we exclusively importing. So that's trend number one. I think now is the time to try to incubate these businesses, partnering with the likes of Dr. Aswani and others to get them to the level where they can actually sustain and absorb large amounts of financing, hopefully with the support of DFC and some of our peer institutions as well. I think the second is some of the more interesting and innovative companies I've seen on the continent have been contextualizing how they deliver services to the African context. So, for example, starting around the time that I started at DFC, some of the more, I had the opportunity of interacting with a number of companies that actually use drone delivery, point-to-point delivery for delivering critical healthcare supplies. Or there's a company in Nigeria called LifeBank that uses motor scooters for getting blood from point A to point B. So I think thinking through what are the things we need on the African continent for healthcare service to be more efficient. And then I think lastly, I forget which of the panelists mentioned this, but integrating technology in how we deliver healthcare has to be part of any 21st century healthcare system. And so I think those are three trends.
Yeah, Chris, I think it's just building on what Jana said. I think also another very interesting thing I always tell people, Africa is truly the sandbox of innovation. Our challenges are no longer problems. They are extremely exciting impact opportunities. The glass is no longer half empty, it's half full. But it's an issue of how do we take those, and I always tell people, any innovation that works in Africa is scalable. If it, in the human-centered design thinking, they say always test on the extreme users. If it can work in Africa, you can scale it. That makes it very simple. But we need to start thinking about like what Wilmot is talking, how do we institutionalize some of the capabilities to help us get there? I don't know if you knew this, but in as much as we're the biggest impact opportunity in the world, if you wanted to study anything on innovative finance or impact investing in Africa using an African institution, you have one choice. There's only one university in the whole continent that teaches impact investing. 54 countries. UCT. It's embarrassing. That's why I'm saying we can't waste this crisis. We've got to come out better. Okay, how can we not have institutions in Botswana who are working with governments and local investors in Tanzania and Uganda teaching us? So when you go, Faith, to talk about blended finance, no one looks at you blankly. It's a terminology that many of us understood. So one of the things I'm doing, actually, I'm working with a group called the Impact and Sustainable Finance. It's a consortium of 95 global business schools that teach this stuff. The usual suspects, your old school, Duke, Stanford, Yale, 95 global business schools going to 100, they're growing every day. One of the joys of being part of that is that all the curriculum and research is made open source. Now, the shocking thing, there's not a single African business school in that consortium. Not one. Okay, so we're doing a train the trainer program where we want to train 40 African business schools in this thing. So in 5 months, they can all set up their own departments of innovative finance. And we can move Africa from the bottom to the continent to the highest number of business schools teaching this stuff. Because it's like having the US, a car market with only one car manufacturer. Doesn't make sense. okay? Because we need to start thinking about how do we innovate finance creatively. One of the things I'm really excited about, and I'm working with Umoton, is faith-based giving. Do you know how much money Kenyans give to the church every Sunday? $90 million. Every Sunday. There's money sitting in churches. Those of us who grew up in Africa, we all went to faith, to mission hospitals and mission schools. The modern church today is disconnected from the realities of the economic hardships of its flock. The number of unemployed youth who go to pray in churches for hope should be given seed money to start businesses. But we've got to get the churches to think differently. I want the church as an investor. I want the church providing seed capital as a catalytic investor. But we've got to take them through an education. So this is why this space is so exciting for me, is that there's so much upside of the stuff we could do. But we've got to be the Africans taking the role. We've lived the problem, we've got to live the solution. It's got to be us taking the role in driving some of this stuff going forward.
Chris, I'll just add a couple things. I think there's innovation needed and more lateral and better lateral thinking when it comes to different financial products targeting healthcare that are bespoke to the characteristics of that asset, right? So what does that mean? More permanent capital vehicles for infrastructure investment. Because it's really difficult to to have liquidity for hospitals and clinics unless there's some service delivery that's informed by tech. And we are starting to see that. And then at the same time, how do we think about the capital markets in terms of REITs and other exit schemes that might be applicable to those types of assets, which are also real estate assets. And then on the earlier stage, ventures, I think we're seeing it. I think, for example, I mentioned Health Finance Coalition, and this has been done by other institutions. This is just one that I'm more familiar with currently, and that is deal construction or technical assistance that is not just sort of simply advising and mentoring, but putting together deals and packaging them bespoke for investors. And then matching it to money. In this case, the Transform Health Fund, which is managed by Afrique Invest. And so I think we're seeing these types of models. And then last thing I'll say is there is another sort of big institution that we have to now encourage to invest, co-invest with other healthcare investors, and that's sovereign wealth funds. So I've spent a lot of time studying sovereign wealth funds and about to publish a book on them. And Nigeria, I think, is one of the leaders. There's now a concerted effort to be organized and structured. It's managed by Ithmar Capital, a consortium of sovereign wealth funds out of Morocco. There was a conference, the first one, in Morocco in June. And so what we're seeing is the sovereign wealth funds are saying, look, we have domestic responsibilities that have to inform the strategy in terms of more domestic investing that we have to do that maybe our global peers don't have the same issues. And so we're seeing money now being focused, whether it's in Angola and Rwanda, and other sovereign wealth funds are really considering how can we become better commercial investors to manage and preserve capital, but partner with the right private equity or venture partner or venture capital investors so that we can share their due diligence and ultimately have better returns.
And let me just ask, we've talked about the what, the how. One thing that troubles me is the why. Why not invest? What are the hurdles that prevent companies from coming in, investors from coming in? We talked about the churches. Jane, I'll come to you. Babe, I'll come to you. What stands in the way? What's the biggest hurdle that we see?
So I can speak for DFC, but not every investor. But I think Wilmot put it really well when he talked about you need to have capital and products available that match the risk that you're taking. I think healthcare is not. We talk about healthcare, but there's many different components within healthcare. I think, infrastructure has a different risk profile than, say, investing in a health tech company. And so there's different organizations that would have appetite for a startup than would, say, constructing a hospital. I think for us historically, the challenges we've had in the healthcare sector are we're a purely private sector investor, and a lot of healthcare is in fact public. So the opportunities for an entity like DFC are limited in that respect. I think second, it's about creating awareness in the market and having good incubation mechanisms for businesses that are emerging and growing, so that they can actually get to the revenue size and profitability size where a large investor like DFC can engage with them. And third, I think we as an institution have done a lot of thinking about how we haven't focused on health security consistently, and I think it's just about the financial institutions taking a strong look at this and being willing to put in the hard work to do a first of type deal, just like some of the examples that I gave you earlier. And I think one of the things that stayed with me from the prior panel was non-communicable diseases are in fact an area where there should be more attention given, and I'm hopeful that we'll have a few announcements in that space before the end of this year. So yeah, thanks for the question.
Yeah, to add to that, I think it's some of the usual stuff, pipeline. You find that's going to be a challenge sometimes. A big question is mindset. We still see the healthcare sector as a public good, and we don't think that there's necessarily enough entrepreneurs coming up with exciting deals that can actually make money and create change. Scale. I think a lot of our healthcare investments or opportunities in Africa tend to be fairly small by the very nature of the segmentation of the continent as well. But I'm hoping that as we build more Pan-African networks like what we're trying to do and what the DFC is trying to do, what Wilmot is trying to do, we can start finding opportunities beyond one country and really help that stuff to scale. And secondly, when I talk about scale, is scale beyond Africa. As I mentioned, if you look at the drone, for example, one of the things we've got a benefit in Africa is in many places, innovation precedes regulation. So there's no better place for you to come and test an intervention or technology than in Africa. Like the drone stuff at Zipline in Rwanda would not probably have worked anywhere in the West. No. Look at M-Pesa when it's done. Some of that stuff, there's no better place to come and test than the continent. So we've got to find how do we incentivize the regulatory environment to encourage more testing and regulation, testing of innovation on this continent. So there's those kind of things, but also we need to be really hailing the African story. So there are a lot of, and exposing deals. So one of the things we try and do with us is, if you go right now to African healthcare and you ask for what's investable, you'll get the same deals. How do we find those gems that are hidden in many places? So a lot of the stuff on my deal share platform, for example, is people like Sonocare. It's a telemedicine app out of Nigeria. There's some really cool innovations on the continent that no one gets to hear about. How do we showcase some of that stuff? So part of this is how do we build a pipeline? Working with the South African Innovation Services, for example, they probably produce all these things that don't go on to get follow-on capital. And there's a lot of these kind of things on the continent. We've got to be deliberate about it.
The thing I'll add is the risk in terms of hesitancy to bet on talent in Africa, or the need to supplement talent. And so I think there has to be greater alignment of the human capital ecosystem, whereby, for example, pharma's now hovering over the continent for diversity in clinical trials. Africa has the most diverse profile genomically than any other region of the world. That's a richness, that's gold, that's oil, that's real. But to run these types of companies, and my colleague can attest to it, whether it's genomics or biotech, requires a certain expertise that other sectors that are receiving live technology investment, such as fintech, it's just a different dimension of technology, right? Fintech is largely low tech, but because the access to capital is such a big need, money's going there and people are making money. So we have to now supplement talent by having multinational corporations, be more intentional about sourcing indigenous talent, and I would argue also diaspora talent and other talent to bring the alignment such that that's part of the profile now that's being more attractive rather than causing investors to be suspicious. And I think that that's going to take a while. I think if you look at the U.S., the VC investment community was tied to the hip to research institutions. That's how it developed. That technology is in its infancy in most schools, if at all. And so to Frank's point, I think that, you know, it's rethinking how we can go about investment, and I think human capital is one that has to happen. And we've seen it. We've seen Nigerians in America have a vital role in finding solutions in terms of vaccinations for COVID. Yeah. You can go across the world, across the continent with their diaspora, and also on the continent as well, to say, hey, these entrepreneurs, these technicians, these biotechnicians, informaticists or life scientists, let's find them and let's bring them into the ecosystem and expand the opportunity set for all technology companies.
Awesome, awesome. I realize we're almost out of time, but Dr. Benga, carry on. Go ahead.
No, thank you. Just also rounding up on the issue of what stops investments. Yeah, the point I really think is that there has to be an intentional commitment to funding healthcare technology. I mean technology broadly, even up to medicines. Because one of the biggest problems is that healthcare is highly regulated. So investors find it easy to walk away, but it's highly regulated for a reason. You're absolutely right that it's easier to fund what's this currency type of investments, even though it's the same technology. I use blockchain in particular because it underlies most of the cryptocurrency investments, but the transaction and record keeping part of the tech, which is much more suitable to healthcare, hardly ever gets the type of support. But again, Chris, this speaks to you in your industry. If I were to say as well, in supporting what must happen in Africa, whether it's developing human capital or even the tech, the equivalent for the equivalent example, especially if you like clinical trials, the equivalent example to what Stavros was talking about, where companies want to sort of donate, but the issue is that it comes with a rider that you must purchase from outside of Africa. And the equivalent example, I think, in clinical trials is that even when big pharma comes in and gets involved in clinical trials, it's still expected that it's the tech that is used from head office in the US to manage clinical trials. We need to think clearly how we can manage that, because it means that those, for example, who are capable of dealing with data management but are more local really can't get in. So you are growing all aspects of activity. The investigators get more business and all of that and the skill, but there still is a bottleneck from that perspective. Thank you.
I wanted to open it up, and I think we've got just a few minutes left if there are any questions at all from the audience. Please.
Good day to everyone. My name is Brailin Chitsonge. I am a farmer, and I'm also a scientist and an advocate for change. And there's a very interesting panel. I just happened to walk in when, I'm not so sure what happened earlier, but it's actually very exciting, and I can relate to it in so many ways. I'm farming. I'm one of the first medicinal cannabis license holders in the country in South Africa, and we've been pushing for international phytomedicines and medicinal cannabis. I just returned from Washington, DC at Johns Hopkins, where we relaunched phytomedicines and medicinal cannabis. It's called Global Health Catalyst Summit. But now when I'm actually looking at all of you, I can now relate to it and connect the dots. Tech that you're talking about, it's something that also featured very much so, and we're now pushing for a drug. I don't know if you heard about it. It's called Galatron for cancer. It's already in phase 3 clinical trials. And you not believe it, it's been kind of like a mission to even get funding for it. And yet it's something that will help on the continent. They're only looking for 5 countries and 237 subjects to do the research. But it's actually been very difficult. And I can relate to the lady what you're saying as well. But then how does the small person, so to speak, I've got access to you, I'm here today and I'm speaking tomorrow on a platform, and I was in Washington speaking, I've been all over the world speaking, but how about the smallholder families? What happens? How do they get to the point where you are? And I hear the gentleman, the 2 gentlemen at the end as well, that funding, financing, and I hear blockchain, institutionalization, and all that, all well and good. But I think we can all admit in this room that there's something missing. It's just the linkages. And I've always described Africa that we are victims of our own success. Only 2 things that are needed: management and organization. How do we now pull all this together? Everything is there. We've got the farmers, we've got the smallholder farmers. For them to get to Aspen, you still need that material that comes from the farm to get to Aspen. We're looking at like from farm to the bedside, where the patient is. But now how do we carry out clinical trials? How do I access you as a smallholder farmer or as a herbalist who's got what they've got? Can we not do data mapping? Can we not capture it and track it and say, right, each country, this is what we've got on the continent? And it's actually unfortunate. I will not lie to you, stand here and say it's incredible. We've got everything that it takes. But what is that we can do? I also serve as your food security ambassador for the continent, the Pan-African Parliament, which is the legislative body of the African Union, where we're setting all these goals, Vision 2063. But we're still looking at it, the Malabo Declaration. But how do we get there? So there's truly something that's missing. And I think you also mentioned about funding and financing. Yes, we are being going around. I've talked to heads of state. I engage with everyone. What is the challenge? How do we get money? What is going on? But then you'll not believe it, just last week I was sitting with one of the vice presidents of the country, and I was asking to say, look, there's this project. And the first thing he said to me, yes, it's good, but we need to do due diligence because there's also terrorism money. So now I can understand also from the government's perspective why there is money, but why are they not accepting it? So I think it's just about us grouping ourselves and organizing ourselves and then moving things forward. I'll not take any more time. I'm happy to engage with all of you because you've got exciting stuff, and I've also got exciting stuff that I would like to engage all of you. So if we can know where we can get all of you, I'd appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Who you are and what your need is. A couple of us are in the business of matchmaking with smaller enterprises, MSMEs and SMEs. I'm happy to talk with you afterwards. One motto I think that we're gonna have to take a look at Africa is what I call the CEO collective, meaning it's important for smaller enterprises to be linked with their peers in the same market if they're doing the same thing to become more attractive as clusters, as opposed to trying to go it alone. And one of the reasons why I say that, because I right now know cannabis and hemp investors, partners who are coming in looking for partners on the ground here that they can develop these joint venture partnerships with. So I'm happy to speak afterwards.
I feel your pain. Okay, I feel your pain, and your pain is for many people. One of the things I'm trying to do is set up a Pan-African Family Offices organization that can fund hedge and fund bets like you, who are potentially very risky at where they are, but they've got huge value should they become successful. So in the next couple of months, we'll be working on getting some family officers who can make a decision in 2 minutes without giving you too much of hoops to jump through. I mean, it's all about how do you avail risk capital to some of you who've got early stage ideas, and this catalytic pool funds, that's part of what it's supposed to be looking at.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I realize now we were a little bit over, so we're just going to take one more question, and then we'll wrap it up from our side.
So I come from an institution that's involved in innovation, And what we find is that innovators are not necessarily all entrepreneurial in mind. And we've got technologies that find themselves on the shelves. And I wondered if any of you on the panel would be interested in a technology book and working together to find good jockeys for technologies and building enterprises around them. Thanks.
Organization?
Apologize for that. It's the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, the CSIR. I think it's one of the largest institutions in innovation across multiple disciplines in the country, on the continent, actually. Thanks.
So I should have done a better job
Go ahead.
of finding what a venture studio is, which is one of our models, and that is doing just what you said, taking a concept.
Hit your mic. Hit your mic with another one.
Next, the
Try
other one.
the other one.
The other one.
Hello? Oh, there it is. Thank you. So we can maybe talk about a venture studio model, which is doing exactly that, taking an idea and finding the right resources, human capital, financing, other resources that are needed to kind of get it off the ground.
Yeah, once again, the kind of stuff that a lot of our entrepreneurs are looking for, especially if they've got some commercial value and you've invested a bit to the point of proof of concept, even if it's pre-revenue. That's kind of like what the Healthcare Funders Forum will be looking to try and address. So you're not guaranteeing funding, but it's a better chance.
Thank you very much. Well, we're looking into lines of genetics and how it impacts healthcare outcomes, and so we'll follow up with you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I think that's going to be it for us. I really appreciate the opportunity to bring such a distinguished panel here. Thank you so much for your time, and you guys enjoy the rest of the conference.